It was another aggressive season for the Eric Tolsky-led Hurricanes. But will winning the offseason finally put them closer to winning a cup? This is the 2025-26 Deep Dive on the Carolina Hurricanes. Hello and welcome to the top 5 in my NHL Deep Dive series. This is the Carolina Hurricanes, and I'm excited about this one, man. I am a big fan of the Hurricanes in terms of how they are constructing their roster at this moment, and I think they're a really, really fascinating team. And it's a team that has been able to get out of the Metro portion of the bracket, but can't seem to quite get over that hump and make it to the playoffs. And we've talked about, everybody's talked at length about their third round woes in the postseason. And I really think that this is the best iteration of what the Hurricanes are that we've seen in this Rod Brind'Amour era. Like, I truly believe that this is the best culmination of players. And, obviously it starts with, getting a guy like Logan Stankoven, who, yes, obviously Mikko Rantanen would have been nice, but he really does fit what this team is trying to do, and he is young, and now they have him locked up long term. They also trade for K'Andre Miller, who I actually like. I think the K'Andre Miller hate was warranted based on what he did especially this last year in New York. But two things about the Hurricanes that we know are true. Number one is defensemen go to Carolina and continuously go from being mediocre to very, very good, right? Like we saw it with, I guess mediocre is the wrong word, but they just go to elevate their game, right? Like Dougie Hamilton's best seasons were in Carolina. Brent Burns had a bit of a resurgence when he went to Carolina. Tony DeAngelo, when he got brought in, had moments where he looked very good. Shane Gostisbehere looked very good. Brady Shea is probably the best example of this, where he was basically he was a net negative player pre-Carolina, and then all of a sudden turned into a legitimate, number 3 defenseman on the team. And then you had, obviously now you have K'Andre Miller coming in, who again, a lot of people have negative things to say about. I really think that there's potential for that to work out. And then obviously the big one in terms of free agency, they go get Nikolai Ehlers, which was maybe the worst kept secret in the NHL the last 4 years, that Nikolai Ehlers the perfect Carolina Hurricane, and getting him here finally gives them a much needed different element to the team. And we'll kind of touch on that here as we go through. But overall, I think Hurricanes fans seem to be pretty happy with how this offseason went. And, Eric Tolsky has shown that he is not afraid to go out and make big swings, right? This is a management group that, went out and got, Jake Gensel, who obviously they couldn't re-sign, and then traded for Mikko Rantanen, and then traded Mikko Rantanen again when they knew they couldn't re-sign, which was a super aggressive move. They go out and make the trade for K'Andre Miller. They go make the trade, or they go sign Nikolai Ehlers. And I've gotten to the point now where I kind of look at what the Hurricanes do, and I just kind of accept that they know what they're doing, because they've proven to be a very smart organization who can get the best out of any player that they bring in. And they've shown this multiple times with players that I haven't been, massive fans of pre-going to Carolina. And they just seem to be able to get the most out of the guys they bring in for the most part. Obviously there's been some whiffs, the Experi Kotkaniemi offer sheet being one of them, but that was partially pettiness in terms of why that happened. Ownership pettiness and whatnot. And obviously that was the Don Waddell managed Hurricanes, but they for the most part they have a pretty good hit rate on players who I'm not super excited about coming in. So I don't really have much. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt on somebody like K'Andre Miller, for example. We look at this team splits, and 8th in offense, 4th in defense, 22nd in goaltending, 2nd in special teams, 3rd in coaching culture. Really, you have Rod Brind'Amour, who's obviously the best coach, who's arguably, I should say, the best coach in the NHL. Now, I do have some concerns about Rod Brind'Amour, which we'll get into in a second, but I know overall, and Eric Tolsky, he's been my guy for a long time. I think a lot of teams should have brought him in when they had the opportunity, but here we are. The goaltending is definitely the biggest question mark, and part of their grade is just the health of Frederik Andersen. If he's healthy, then that's great. He's a very solid goalie when healthy, but it's just, can he play a full season? It's been a while since that happened. Offensively, obviously, like they bring in Nikolai Ehlers, which is definitely going to help. The defense is still very good. There's really not like the biggest glaring hole on this team for me is the true like game breaking scoring, which I don't think they necessarily need. We kind of talked about this with the Capitals. I don't think it's like a huge need, and it's something that they're clearly being aggressive on in a bunch of different areas. I've heard Antonio Panarin's name get thrown out a little bit in Carolina. I've heard Kaprizov is the betting favorite to end up in Carolina. I'm sure they'd offer Connor McDavid a substantial amount of money if hit the market. So like it's a front office that's been aggressive and will likely continue to do so, whether it is or isn't one of those three guys. But goaltending is definitely the biggest question mark, right? This team that has just kind of ignored the goaltending position a little bit. They're kind of just letting things happen and just kind of hope that the chips fall in a way that's going to be beneficial for them. And if Frederik Andersen's healthy, then they'll be fine in net. If he's not, then there's some question marks there. But overall, like, I definitely think that it's a pretty well-rounded team that is just touching up things at this point rather than making massive fundamental changes to the way the roster is built. So we jump into the management group here. Erik Tulsky gets a B simply because he just hasn't been here long enough for me to give him anything higher than that. But I mean, I'm a big fan. As you can probably imagine, if you know anything about me, Erik Tulsky is one of the smartest people in hockey currently, especially for somebody who came not from a hockey background. I mean, if you know anything about his path, it's pretty incredible that he's in the position that he is, and good on him for getting there, and not kind of going the boys club like Nepo route. He very much paved his own path to get where he is, and I gotta respect him for that. Him and Kyle Dubas are kind of the lone wolves in that, but even Kyle Dubas came from a sports background, right? Like, he grew up in sports, whereas Erik Tulsky didn't really grow up in hockey at all. Rod Brind'Amour is a unique case. I think Rod Brind'Amour is one of the best coaches in terms of getting the most out of his players, right? Like doing the most with less, right? Because if you look at the Hurricanes roster on paper, and we're going to do that in a second here, like it looks like a good team, but it's not star-studded. It's not this world-beating roster, especially last year. I think more so last year and the year before that was the case. There's a reason why the Hurricanes continuously trade for these big-name players, because they're just trying to find something that sticks, essentially. The one thing I have trepidations with Rod Brind'Amour is the fact that he's very stubborn in the fact that they have to run the team in a very specific way, right? And I don't think this is coming up from higher up beyond him, because it happened both in the Waddell era as well as this one, where they're very much going to run their dump and chase forward check offense and be damned if it stops, if it doesn't do anything. And if teams counter it, then they're just kind of they're in trouble. And we saw it last year especially, where he just got outcoached by Paul Maurice, right? He got fundamentally beat, where the Panthers were able to adjust in even game by game, like in game situations. They were able to adjust their strategies and make changes, whereas the Hurricanes really didn't. They just kind of like put their head down and just kept going, beating it against the wall and hoping that something would finally break through, and maybe it will one day. But I would like to see him expand the coaching philosophy and the systems that they run, because I think that would be beneficial to them. And that's kind of my main criticism of the Hurricanes as a whole, because he's getting a lot out of the players in the system that they run, but the system they run is pretty easily counterable, especially by the best teams at the top of the league, right? Like we've seen that with Florida now. Last year especially, and in the last time they were in the Eastern Conference Final as well. So that's kind of my one thing. But I mean, this team's a contender. I'm sorry, like they're one of the best teams in the league, and even if you think that the only reason why they're getting to conference finals because of the weak division, which fair enough. Like I don't think the Metro was particularly world beating last year. The reality is they're still getting to the Final Four, right? So just by that proxy, just giving them a 25% chance, all things equal, to get to a Stanley Cup final still makes them a contender, right? Like whether or not you think that they're legitimately a top 5 team, which I do. But you still have to give them that benefit of the doubt simply because they're going to be they're going to have a puncher's chance. And we've seen worse teams get further in the playoffs due to circumstances, right? I mean, the Montreal Canadiens are the perfect example of this when they got to the Stanley Cup final as basically a non-playoff team due to the circumstances of the division they were in. So you have to give them somewhat of a puncher's chance just based on that. But beyond that, I do think the team is pretty good. And when we look at their numbers last year, it's a team that was very good in the nerdy areas, which is kind of what you expect from this team, right? 7th in goals for, 21st in goals against is rough. They definitely were not a good defensive team in terms of actual goals against, but they didn't give up a ton of quality. Their quality chances weren't crazy. Their expected numbers in terms of what Jay Fresh has them better defensively than Evolving Hockey does, but I mean first in expected goals for basically on both models. Their expected goals share was first in the NHL. I think that would probably be pretty close to true on both models as well. 12th in actual goal share isn't bad. Their power play wasn't great last year, but their expected numbers on the power play weren't terrible. Their penalty kill was one of the best in the NHL and were very good in terms of their expected numbers as well. So this team really struggled finishing wise, and I do think that should just even out. I mean, they were 7th in goals for and 29th in finishing. If you get that finishing level up to the mid-teens, let's say they go from 29th to 18th in finishing, they could lead the league in goals. That's not a crazy thing to say that the Hurricanes are the number 1 team in scoring next year if they can just become a league average finishing team. That's not a huge hill to climb for a team that's trying to win a Stanley Cup, and all of a sudden they're generating the most opportunities and they're scoring the most goals, and their offense becomes very, very hard to stop if that's the case, and it already is. So I really think that's kind of the biggest thing, and I think somebody like Nikolai Ehlers is going to help with that. So we jump into this offense. I think this is a good place to start here, and it's really a very underrated group, I think. Now, like a lot of teams throughout this series, the second line center spot is a massive question. Maybe besides the Jets, this is the most center needy team in the NHL. Right, in terms of contenders, obviously, the Jets and Hurricanes have a better center core than Chicago or whoever you want to pick at the bottom of the league. But in terms of the true contenders, Carolina and Winnipeg are 1A and 1B in terms of desperately needing a 2C. And Carolina didn't really, unlike Winnipeg, who brought in Jonathan Toews, the Hurricanes really didn't do anything to change that, right? They're still running Svachnaho, who's great. I love Svachnaho. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Jordan Staal, and Mark Jankowski, which doesn't really blow you away. And I think looking at the center core, I think that Jesperi Kotkaniemi gets a lot of hate because of the contract and everything, but as your 3C, he's not a bad option. The problem is that Jordan Staal is the perfect 3C. So there's no real getting around that. He's just kind of in no man's land on this roster at this point. But the wingers on this team are very strong, right? You have Nikolai Ehlers and Seth Jarvis, who are kind of your top 2 guys, but then you have Logan Stankoven, who's very young and already looks very good in this system. You have Andrei Svechnikov, who I think the jury's kind of still out on what Andrei Svechnikov can be. I was very bullish on him earlier in his career. He seems to have peaked. I don't know what the next move is for him. Even as a second line winger, I think that he's in a very good spot, right? Because obviously they have Nikolai Ehlers and Seth Jarvis, who are better than him. So I think that there's still a lot of value in what Svechnikov does, but then they bring in a guy like Taylor Hall, who was seen as kind of a throw-in in the Rantanen trade, but turned out to be actually a pretty big piece of that trade and does exceptionally help the depth on this roster. Jackson Blake, who I really like, very young, defensive type center there. William Carrier, I think, is one of the best fourth liners in the NHL in terms of what he can bring there. And Jonathan Martinook, who's been a very good leader for this team, been a rallying guy for this team, and it has also really stepped up his game on the ice over the last couple years, and that's something I didn't really expect from him. He seemed like just kind of a throwaway fourth liner, but he's done a very good job elevating himself, out of that fourth line shadow and now moving up into maybe a top 9-ish role for this team. We started Sebastian Aho, and Sebastian Aho, I think, especially in the playoffs this year, really made himself known to the wider NHL community, right? I think Sebastian Aho is somebody who people who pay attention to a lot of hockey know who he is, but this season, I think, really put the spotlight on him being a legitimate, number one center. And he had a very strong season overall as well, but the playoffs especially, the playoffs do this fun thing to players on small market teams where suddenly you're playing against, you're playing on national television every night, and people get to watch you for the first time. I think that there's the average hockey fan in Western Canada probably doesn't watch a lot of Carolina Hurricanes games throughout the season, but suddenly the playoffs come around and you want to watch, Alex Ovechkin play, and it's oh wow, Sebastian Aho was great, and you really get a lot of that spotlight on you there, and especially in the Eastern Conference Final, I think he still had a pretty solid run despite the few games, and all those things really do culminate into him proving to the world that he is this legitimate, number one center in the prime of his career who can be the best player on a team. And I think that this year really solidified that for me. But his supporting cast is also really good, especially on the wings, right? Obviously the center core isn't, but the wing support on this team is actually exceptional for what they need. So Sebastian Aho is going to get support in that sense, but he will have to carry a lot of the load on as a center, and we see that his competition rate is 97th percentile in the NHL, so he's playing against extremely tough competition, and he still looks incredible. I mean, last year was one of his best seasons of his career, and I don't see that stopping much. I think, especially if he ends up playing with a guy like Nikolai Ehlers, that's going to help his game even more, and heading into a prime of his career is a player that I think is on a very good team-friendly deal, not necessarily team-friendly deal, but I mean $9.8 million for 7 more years as a number one center is going to look really good when the cap's up to $150 million in a couple of years, based on reports, right? This contract is going to be one of the better ones in the NHL. Seth Jarvis also had a very strong season last year, and his offensive production really started to fully come into his own as the year went on, and he's somebody who is very much heading into a prime of his career, being 24 years old, but he got the opportunity to be on the Four Nations team. He got a lot of popularity there due to his friends traveling the world, to follow him, and I think they went to the World Championships too, where he was there. So he's somebody who's going to be on a pretty straight track onto an Olympic roster this year, simply because of the Four Nations and then going to the World Championships. Team Canada likes that, and I think that's well warranted. I think Seth Jarvis is one of the better young players in the NHL that, again, doesn't get a ton of attention, and I think that his skill set is he's such a shifty player at the puck, and he's able to open space up for himself, but he's also just so responsible defensively. And that's so rare for especially a young winger, but just wingers in general. The fact that he's able to be this really strong defensive player, and that's something that you kind of see throughout this Hurricanes team, is just how responsible they are defensively. I mean, their expected goals against numbers kind of prove that in the intro. It's just more so the bounces aren't going their way, and that happens, right, in some cases. But all you can do as a forward is just, and a defenseman, is limit the amount of chances against, and if your goalie can't make the saves, then that's not really on you. But Seth Jarvis is exceptional defensively. He's really, really creative offensively. He doesn't generate a ton of chances for himself, but the ones that he does, he is finishing at a decent rate. He's and he's going to get better, right? He's 23 going on 24. I have no worry that he's going to be somebody who's going to develop into one of the better two-way wingers in the NHL, especially if his defensive numbers continue to climb as his offensive numbers do. And I mean, point wise, he's putting up points already. So it really, as the volume of chances and the quality of chances that he creates goes up, the points are only going to continue to grow for him. Nikolai Ehlers is the big one, and if you have been following me for any length of time, you know how much I adore Nikolai Ehlers. He is one of my favorite players in the NHL, point blank. So underrated, all right? And you might look at his point totals and be like, well, he's not putting up a ton of points. He's not playing in a ton of games. Sure, he's had injury issues. Fair enough. All right. It's nothing I can't, talk you out of that. The usage that Nikolai Ehlers got in Winnipeg is astounding to me. Like, he went through 3 head coaches, right? I mean, I think he played a little bit under Claude Noel. I don't care. 3 head coaches. All 3 of them just decided, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was Paul Maurice decided one day that he was a third liner, and then everybody else just kind of followed suit because Paul Maurice went to Florida and immediately found success, and people just kind of read into that. But I don't know in what world, like, David Gustafsson should have been getting more minutes a game, especially in playoff games. Like, Jesus, go look at his playoff numbers, than Nikolai Ehlers. Nikolai Ehlers is, and here's what I think is so important about this, right? You might look at Nikolai, and this is why I think Nikolai is like the perfect player for the Hurricanes, because as I talked about in the intro, and this is why a lot of people think that he's the perfect player for the Hurricanes, right? And there's a big discussion on Twitter, right, from people who frankly didn't understand the nuance of this signing, where they pointed out the fact that Nikolai Ehlers isn't a dump and chase player. And he isn't a, go into the corners, win puck battles, and then be a huge possession guy in the offensive zone. That's not who Nikolai Ehlers is. Nikolai Ehlers is very much a controlled zone entry, off the rush, create havoc, get quick, transition offense. That's who Nikolai Ehlers is. And if you remember in the intro, my biggest complaint about Rod Brind'Amour is the fact that he's not able to adapt his offenses, and his offense is very rigid, and it's very much a dump and chase. We're going to grind it out, get pucks to the net, we're going to take 1,000 shots a game and just bang out chances and fight for every goal and be gritty, and that's just how we're going to play hockey, and be damned if it works or not. Nikolai Ehlers can fundamentally change that philosophy because he is so good. He is one of the best transition wingers in the NHL, period, point blank. The numbers back it up. His zone entries per 60 is one of the best in the NHL. His controlled entries per 60 is one of the best in the NHL. His entries leading to chances per 60 is one of the best in the NHL. He is one of the best transition players in the league. Possession, transition forwards in the NHL. That alone will allow the Hurricanes to add a wrinkle to their offense that they have not had. They have not really had a player who can do that. Mikko Rantanen could do that, but they only had 13 games to fit him into the system and make it work in the middle of the season. It was never going to work as efficiently as it could have. They've had a whole offseason to figure this out. They'll have a training camp. They'll have preseason to figure it out. I truly do believe that Nikolai Ehlers might be the key to unlocking a new dynamic to the Hurricanes offense. Because he's so good at the one thing the Hurricanes haven't been able to do well. And if they can utilize that truly could be the key to unlocking this Hurricanes offense to another level. And it's something to watch as the season goes on. And I think people are lacking the nuance in the Nikolai Ehlers argument or the discussion to understand that yeah, he isn't the quote-unquote typical Hurricanes player, but that's the point, because they have a bunch of the typical Hurricanes players. They have probably the most out of any roster in the NHL. They have almost all of the typical Hurricanes players on their team already. This is about adding something new, and Nikolai Ehlers does that thing that they're missing better than almost any player in the NHL. And I really think that's going to be a huge advantage to this team. So just something to watch as the season goes on. But I am buy all of your Nikolai Ehlers stock right now, because if this hits, and I think that there's a very good chance it will, because Rod Brind'Amour is an extremely smart person, and Eric Tulsky is an extremely smart guy. and they made this signing for a reason, and I don't think it was to completely change how Nikolai Ehlers plays, he could have an incredible season this year. And so could the Hurricanes. And all those issues about the Hurricanes being very one-dimensional and being very good at that one-dimensional thing, but not having a second pitch, they might kind of start to disappear. We'll see. I don't think it's going to be perfect. But as the season goes on, it's something to watch for. Andrei Svechnikov has been such a fascinating player because he was somebody who, early in his career, right, 22 years old, looked like the next superstar in the NHL. His numbers were fantastic. He was putting up incredible offensive numbers. His defensive numbers were great. Finishing was fine, and I think that was kind of the issue, right? People were critical of his finishing ability, but 22 years old, you're like, it'll figure itself out. And then over the last 2 seasons, Andrei Svechnikov has just been on this incredibly steep decline. And I really don't have an answer for why that is, because it's so opposite from what you typically see from a 24-year-old winger. Like a high-drafted 24-year-old winger isn't supposed to fall off a cliff. And the good news for Hurricanes fans, there's still a lot of room for him to move up here. And the other good news is they have a, brand new shiny winger toy that they just brought in, and they have another brand new shiny-ish winger who is developed into a better version of what Andrei Svechnikov was supposed to be in Seth Jarvis. And the pressure on Svechnikov to be the number one guy on this team, best winger on the team thing is kind of, that ship has sailed, right? Could it happen at some point? Maybe he bounces back and has an incredible season this year. He's 24. It's possible. But I do think that, the less pressure on Svechnikov to be that guy. And to be fair, I think part of the problem is he just doesn't have a center, right? When they were playing with Aho, things were better, right? But then, last year 2 years ago, they bring in Jake Gensel to kind of fill that void. Then they bring in Mikko Rantanen to fill that void. And now they bring in Nikolai Ehlers to fill that void. And I really think part of the problem is just Svechnikov doesn't have a center right now, right? It's very Kotkaniemi, God bless his soul, but, it's not a 2C. And I think that might be part of the issue. But I don't know what the answer is to fix what's happening to Svechnikov. Right? It's not a coaching thing because he was, when he was 22 years old and looking like one of the hottest young wingers in the NHL, Brad Brendamore was his coach, running the same system. So I don't know what the problem is. I mean, offensively, he's still creating chances at a decently high level. It's dropped off a bit, but his finishing just tanked last season. His defensive numbers have tanked last season. His power play numbers are still solid. He's still passing pretty well. He's creating a bunch of primary assists. But it's just, he needs to have a bounce back season this year. If he bounces back this year, has a strong season, less pressure, less competition against, because Ehlers going to take some of those first line minutes, I'll feel better about it. But he's a very big anomaly right now, and I do think that as much of an X factor as Nikolai Ehlers is, as I just went over, I think that Andrei Svechnikov developing back into that very high end second line forward, lower end first line forward is very important for this team to have success and to win a Stanley Cup. I think that is he's very important to that, and he's still part of that core group, despite the fact that his numbers have dropped off. So I think Svechnikov is somebody to kind of watch for this year. Do I expect him to continue to decline? Not really. I don't think he can get much lower than he was last season, which is the good news. But I think that they need to. Carolina needs to figure out how to get a bounce back here from Svechnikov, because I was very high on him a couple years ago. I still believed in him 2 years ago. Last year was not good. So getting him back up to first line level, I think, is key for this team's success. Logan Stankoven, on the other hand, is he is a poster boy for what, again, incredible rush offense player, right? He does a lot of the same. He does a lot of things that the Hurricanes look for, right? He takes an incredibly high volume of shots, great at that. Very good at contributing to, primary opportunities. Very good at creating chances. Like, that is exactly what the Hurricanes look for, right? Like, I truly believe that they just have like a microstat sheet where they just look at players that, can get the puck to the center of the ice and take a bunch of shots, and that's how they pick most of their forwards, and that's what Logan Stankoven's strengths are to a T. Like, if you were to build a pro Carolina Hurricanes player in a lab, Logan Stankoven might be the closest thing that comes out for the Hurricanes. Like, he just takes an abundance of shots, very good at getting, high quality chance contributions, very good at getting past the slot. He's very good at getting the puck out of the defensive zone. He touches the puck a ton in the defensive zone. He wins a lot of his battles to get the puck out into transition and get it back into the offensive zone. He does a lot of those things really, really well. And being as young as he is, there's still a lot of room to grow here. And again, like, I think this is good for a player like Andrei Svechnikov, for instance, because it just takes more of the pressure off, right? Like, I think at the end of this year, Svechnikov might be the fourth most important winger on this team. He might already be. And that's actually probably for the best, because if he can't bounce back, then he becomes, a nice, luxury item if he does end up getting there, right? It's not a necessity anymore. So you kind of hedged your bets a little bit there, and I do really like that for the Hurricanes. Maybe somebody can fetch you a second line center. I don't know. But Logan Stankoven's like the perfect Carolina Hurricanes player to build in the lab. And, being extremely young, obviously Mikko Rantanen would have been nice, but I really think that the return they got from Mikko Rantanen was very, very good. And it continued to load up their cupboard with assets, and a team that still has, a very good plethora of young players. Alexander Nikishin, they still have Brandon Nadeau as somebody who might also step up here. So having those guys available to you still, plus a Logan Stankoven who's really young, plus a Seth Jarvis who's really young, like, this team still has a lot of runway left to get to that peak, and they're already, a top 5 team in the NHL. Taylor Hall, like I talked about, was kind of a throwaway piece in the Mikko Rantanen trade and didn't get, a ton of excitement. It was kind of like, oh, Taylor Hall, he used to be good. He had a very strong season last year. He had a very nice season, kind of playing this, middle of the lineup, middle six role, being, a veteran presence on this team, a stable offensive presence. We've talked a lot going through this series about secondary scoring and teams that desperately need secondary scoring. And the Carolina Hurricanes are a team that, was in that boat to some extent. But I really do believe that, the addition here of Taylor Hall has helped them stabilize that, right? Like, he can be a very, very good, effective secondary scorer. He can play on your second line power play. He can play on your first line power play if you need to. He can bounce up the lineup in case of an injury. There's a lot of flexibility that Taylor Hall gives them. And, if his role is just to be a stable presence on the third line for the entire season, then I think that's really good, right? We've seen the Florida Panthers make a living out of having, super aggressive, offensively driven third line. And I think the Carolina's got the makings of that starting to happen. So I like the Taylor Hall pickup when it happened. I think that he's a very nice, underrated piece on this Hurricanes offense. Jesperi Kotkaniemi, like, listen, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, like, I have a soft spot for Jesperi Kotkaniemi. He's somebody that I really liked in Montreal. I thought it was going to look better than it did, than it has in Carolina. If Jesperi Kotkaniemi is like your third or fourth line center, there's value there, right? He's decent defensively, can generate, solid offense. But he's not a 2C. And I think that the Hurricanes are doing him a ton of disservice playing him in that role and just hoping that it works, because he's 25 years old now. Like, it's not happening. Do I think that this is going to be the most support that he's had throughout his run? Yeah, like, I think, Logan Stankoven and Andrei Svechnikov, potentially as his line mates, are going to make him look pretty good. And are going to, soften what Jesperi Kotkaniemi is a little bit. But, like, the number, and I'm sure the Hurricanes understand that's Jesperi Kotkaniemi being your 2C is just not the answer. Like, it's simply just not the answer at center. And I think that there's a lot of his game that I do like. And I think that he is underrated in terms of being a player. Like, he just gets shit on because he's not a second-line center. And I think playing him in the right role would elevate his stock around the league, right? It'd be like, oh yeah, he's good. He's a third-line center. But it's just he's overplayed for the role that he's in, and I really think that that's doing him a disservice. So, pour one out for your Jesperi Kotkaniemi, because I think that he deserves better than what the Hurricanes are giving him right now. But unfortunately for them, there really wasn't much on the center market. Maybe Mason McTavish comes to Carolina and everything gets fixed. But aside from that, this team really needs to just I think when we're talking about November and December, when all these teams, when the 30 of 31 teams in the NHL realize that they're not actually Stanley Cup contenders and need to start selling pieces off, Carolina's going to be there, and they're going to be able to bid pretty high for a quality center because they still have a ton of assets. So expect for that to be part of the mid-season shakeups here for the Hurricanes. Jordan Staal, I quickly want to touch on here, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time on Jordan Staal, but he really is so underrated defensively. His ability to just cut off lanes and make plays and make things happen is so good, and his hockey IQ is just off the charts, right? We've talked about this so much throughout the series with veteran players being able to read defenses and make plays, and Jordan Staal is very good at that, and his retrievals and exits aren't where they were a couple of years ago, but he's still able to generate decent offense, especially from a third line role, and just his ability to just halt rushes and take away passing lanes and not allow a ton of chances against is so perfect for what this team does, and is really so perfect as a third line center on a lot of teams, but especially for how Carolina likes to run their offense and their defense. Jordan Staal has been the best player for that in that role for them, and has really kind of carved himself out a pretty permanent role here on the Hurricanes until he decides to retire, which is going to be fairly soon. But he's given himself a pretty stable position on this team until then. Finally, William Carrier. Quickly on Carrier, he is such a good two-way player. Now he's starting to decline a little bit. He's had, he's been hurt, especially by his finishing just tanking the last couple of years. But in terms of his offensive and defensive, overall macro stat numbers, fantastic. Like I said, one of the best fourth liners in the NHL. Now I don't love the $2 million for 5-year deal. I don't think paying fourth liners for 5 years is a great decision, but in terms if he can just continue, I don't really care about the finishing as a fourth liner. It doesn't, I just don't care. But if you're able to just generate a ton of offense, pucks are going to go in the net. And if you're able to limit chances against, that's really all I want from a fourth liner. So in terms of his archetype, William Carrier is the best fourth liner that I could create in a lab. And yeah, the term of the contract is long, but in terms of being somebody you can just throw it on the ice, I mean, he's 29 years old. I'm not really concerned about that contract aging poorly. He'll be 34, 35 by the time it ends. Fair enough. He really is just the perfect fourth liner in terms of his result numbers, and he has been for a while, right? He did this in basically everywhere he's been as well, and he's really carved out that perfect role. So this is just, it's a really good low cost buy for the Hurricanes. I mean, by the time this contract starts to age poorly, it's $2 million mean nothing based on where the cap's going to be at that point, right? So it's it really doesn't matter all that much. Jordan Martinook is kind of in the same boat. Like I said, kind of in the intro, he has become an exceptional penalty killer. His defensive numbers are extremely strong in terms of what he's doing in suppression. He can generate a bit of offense, but that's not really his game. But as a third line defensive forward, he really has developed very well in that sense. And you're seeing kind of a trend here throughout the Hurricanes where their wingers are all very defensively responsible, right? For the most part. And that really is helpful for a weaker center core, especially. Not that, Jordan Staal is probably the best defender on this team, but, in terms of Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Mark Jankowski and whoever else they're running out at center, they don't necessarily have to be a good two-way center, even Sebastian Aho, because the wingers can make up some of that slack defensively. And when you have some of the best defensive wingers in the league on your team, you can kind of just focus on acquiring talent to put around them, right? Because the edge parts of your roster are going to make up a lot of that ground. And Jonathan Martinook, I mean, obviously, he's been a good leader for the team too, and all the locker room stuff. You can talk about all that if you want to, but in terms of his on-ice results, like he's still been a very effective player. So shout out to Jonathan Martinook. You move to this blue line here, and it's a blue line I really like. I think that their quote unquote weakest link on this team is Alexander Nikishin, and he's stepping in as a rookie. Like that's not a bad place to be, right? Like now, the criticism I have for this blue line is they really don't have like a Robin to Jacob Slavin, who is one of the best two-way defensemen in the NHL, one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL. Jalen Chatfield has put up really, really strong numbers, and he started to elevate himself in the roster. So his overall production has actually like elevated. One of the biggest criticisms of him a couple years ago was the fact that he was playing third pair role, putting up really good numbers, but against really weak competition, and they really eased him into a more higher up role in the roster. And again, the defensive factory that their Carolina Hurricanes have been, he's been pretty good in that. Sean Walker, again, a very stable defenseman there. Shane Gosper has become, very, very good, bottom of the lineup offensive defenseman. He's very impressed me in terms of like what he still looks like. Alexander Nikishin, again, we're real worried there. And Condre Miller is, again, a player that I think does a lot of things that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to like, right? He's very much a volume shooter. He has his issues, and Rangers fans will be very quick to point them out. But again, like the Carolina Hurricanes have been a defensive factory for so long that I really just don't have a ton of concerns about. Like I'm not sitting here being like, oh my God, they're going to be awful. He stinks, whatever. Like they have smart people in charge making these decisions. I don't love the appeal to authority on most days, but in terms of what the Hurricanes track record has been with bringing in quote-unquote project players and turning them around, they have a pretty high hit rate. So, it was a bit of a gamble, especially with the contract extension, but I believe in what the Hurricanes have done, and especially defensively. They've made a living out of, churning out, castaway defensemen and turning them into extremely high-quality players. So I have zero doubt that that's also going to happen here. First of all, Jacob Slavin, I mean, his offensive numbers took a bit of a hit last year, but in terms of, defensive ability, one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL, especially for his competition rate, exceptional there, and exceptional in the penalty kill too, and that's why I kind of put him in the, I think that there's a real argument for him being the best defensive defenseman in the league, because he's good at both 5-on-5 and on the penalty kill, but his offensive numbers, I think, get a bit underrated, right? Like I don't consider Slavin a defensive defenseman. I consider him a two-way defenseman because his offensive numbers are still very good. Now he doesn't play that much on the power play, but he finishes at league average level. He create assists on a league average level, but his ability to drive play and create chances, and he's very much just spamming shots, right? It's all part of this Hurricanes offense. But he does it very well, right? And that's why his finishing isn't very high, and that's why his goals and everything isn't super high, because he's just, he is doing this the point shot thing that the Hurricanes love. But he very much fits what this team needs, and he didn't fall off the second Brett Pesce left either, which some people thought he might. But he's just been, a rock defensively for basically his whole career. He's been, very good as a two-way defender. I think he got a ton of love for his play at the Four Nations. He looked exceptional in that tournament. I think he was maybe the Team USA's best defenseman, and on a blue line that featured Quinn Hughes, or like group at least, that like at the time, right? Obviously Quinn Hughes didn't play, but with the big names like Quinn Hughes and Adam Fox and Zach Rowinski and everybody else that was on that blue line, Jacob Slavin standing out was very good for him, and I think that's gonna be a similar story at the Olympics. Condre Miller is, like I said, like I get it. The numbers last year weren't very good. He stagnated in New York. I get it. The Rangers were a mess last year, right? Like let's tell it how it is here, right? The Rangers were a disaster last season. there was a lot of moving parts going on in New York. They had a massive flux around their blue line, especially with the movement of Jacob Trouba, and then all of the offensive stuff, guys like Capocacco going out, JT Miller coming in. There was a lot of moving parts on this team. Some young players aren't going to be able to handle that. And I think that it kind of hurt what Keandre Miller was going to do, and it kind of helped stagnated him a little bit. I don't think that he's going to come in here and be the next Jacob Slavin. That's not what I expect him to look like. But I do think, like, in terms of being a very solid number 3, maybe a number 2 guy at some point, Keandre Miller will be able to do that pretty well. Like, again, like the Hurricanes, and this is very much me just believing in what the Hurricanes do, because they have consistently churned out these project defensemen and turned them into guys who are going to go out and get huge money on their third and fourth contracts. And I haven't seen any reason to doubt that's going to happen in Keandre Miller. Like, I want to see it play out first, right? Like, his numbers last year in New York weren't great. I get that. Sure, fair enough. But I want to see what it looks like for a year in Carolina first, because I thought Brady Shea was an awful signing. And Brady Shea was fantastic for the Hurricanes, and then he went somewhere else and looked terrible. Right? So it's like, there's something about how the Hurricanes use their defensemen that makes them more valuable than they actually are. Or at least where they'd actually be somewhere else, right? Like the Hurricanes' blue line system is very similar to how like the New England Patriots ran their defenses back in the day, where it just very much they'd plug a guy in who was very good at very specific things and turn him into a quote-unquote superstar, and then he'd leave and flop because no other team knew how to do that. And the Hurricanes are like the best team in the NHL at doing that with their blue line. So I really don't have a lot of doubts there. Jalen Chatfield, like I said, like his numbers have dropped off a bit from where they were a couple years ago, right? Like, but he's playing first pair minutes now, right? Like, you look at his numbers from 3 seasons ago, for instance. Chatfield was this analytical darling, putting up extraordinary expected numbers, but he was doing against it like extremely weak competition, and now his competition level has elevated significantly, and his numbers have dropped off, right? Like, that's going to happen, but it didn't drop off to the extent that I'm worried about it. I don't like. There's not a ton of growth left here. Obviously, 29 turning 30. There's not a lot of development that's going to happen. But if you can just be a stable defenseman at this level for the next 3-4 years, you're got to be pretty happy with that. And he was somebody who, again, like looked extremely good in a lesser role. And maybe if Keandre Miller develops and can really become that number 2 guy, and Alexander Nikishin pops off this season, then maybe Chatfield gets back to playing in a third pair, maybe fourth defenseman role, and then his numbers can kind of bounce back to where they were. So in terms of utility player, Chatfield's somebody who has now proven that he can play up and down the lineup, and he's going to be pretty good at it no matter where he is in the lineup. Sean Walker, I just think is so underrated. Like, he does a lot of little things exceptionally well. He's so good as a zone entry defender. He's extremely good as a forward checker, especially for a defenseman. He's very good in that sense, even in defensive zone too. His defensive puck touches aren't great. His retrievals actually aren't like extremely efficient. He does get a ton of exits, but he doesn't. He can also lose some exits, especially with possession. Zone entry defender, very good in that sense. He does take quite a bit of shots as a defender. His cycle game is fantastic. His forechecking game is fantastic. Again, like very much build a Carolina Hurricane defender in the lab. Sean Walker is going to pop out, and I think it was a very good acquisition, and he fits what this team does really well. And that's the Hurricanes have branched out a little bit and have tried to start expanding what they're going to do, but Sean Walker is very much the prototypical Carolina Hurricanes player. He does the things that they like to do the most very well, and I'll give him credit for that. Shane Gosper, like I said, the thing with Shane Gosper, and I mean, like, people are going to look at his rating and be like, why is he rated so low? Because he's a third pair defenseman, right? There was a cap that I had on the overalls for third pair guys. Whatever. I can get into the nuances of my rankings some other day. the point is this: Shane Gosper as an offensive defenseman is very good, especially as, a depth guy, right? Like, I'm very much a proponent of having dynamic offensive players throughout your lineup because it creates matchup problems. And Shane Gosper has been a matchup problem ever since he's come to Carolina. He rejuvenated. He is somebody who has tanked and rejuvenated his career like 4 times throughout his NHL career. And he's become a very stable, very, very good, third pair kind of defenseman at this point. And there's still a lot of value in that, right? He's putting up exceptional power play numbers. His defensive numbers actually aren't bad either. But, finishing wise, he's exceptional at that. He scores a ton. From a blue line perspective, he plays against insanely weak competition. But because he's buried down the lineup, they can do that, and it actually elevates what he can do offensively because he's playing against weaker competition. Like, it's good, right? That's not a negative towards him. It's actually like a matchup dominant thing that the Hurricanes are doing. I love Shane Gosper as like a depth piece on this team, and I expect another strong season for him. Finally, Alexander Nikishin is the shiny new toy here for the Carolina Hurricanes, and this is why Scott Morrow is like expendable, right? Because Nikishin, by all accounts, should be better than what Scott Morrow is. But Nikishin's hit rate is extremely high. His chances of being top NHL defenseman are very high. I really have no doubt that he's going to look very good. Now, he's drafted, obviously in 2020, so he's had some time to develop here. He's 23, but as a defenseman, that doesn't worry me a ton. Defensemen do age a little bit. It takes some time for defensemen to mature, so the time in Russia should help him in that sense, actually. And I'm excited to see what he looks like. I'm excited to see what a full year of Nikishin. I mean, obviously, he played a little bit in the playoffs, but I'm excited to see what a full year of Alexander Nikishin looks like. And he's going to be eased into the lineup, right? If he can't handle being a top pair NHL defenseman right out the gate, he won't have to be, right? He's going to be the 6th defenseman on this team. He's going to get sheltered. He'll be very much running what the Shane Gosper situation is against weak competition. Let him kind of flourish in those roles. He'll look very, very good out the gate. That's kind of the goal. But it won't be against stiff competition. They'll ease him up in the lineup as they go along. But the top 4 on this team is very strong in terms of like their floor. So I don't think it's something that you really have to rush. So I'm excited to see what it looks like. I think that there might be a bit of overrating done with Nikishin by the end of the season because of the competition level. But I don't necessarily think that's gonna be a bad thing overall. It's just it might be a bit of goggles on for him at the start of the season just based on that. And finally, we get into the goalies, and like the biggest thing here is just health, right? Like Frederik Andersen, I think is a very strong starting goalie. I think he can win a Stanley Cup with Frederik Andersen in goal if he's actually in goal. If he's not playing, that's kind of a problem, right? Peter Korchenkov is underrated in terms of what he's done, but it seems like the Hurricanes are very hesitant to give him the keys to the kingdom. So I'm interested to see if that kind of changes. At this point, I want to see if there's an option for him to take on a bigger role here and actually get some trust. Because it seems like as soon as Frederik Andersen gets hurt, the discussion in Carolina is just, well, we don't have a goalie anymore. And I think Korchenkov has been good enough to warrant some leeway in that sense. But you look at Frederik Andersen's numbers here, and his his Fenwick save percentage when he's playing was projected to be very low, and his actual save percentage was very high. And his penalty kill numbers, same thing. When he's playing, he's fine, right? But it's just you need to be playing, and if he can't stay healthy, then the Hurricanes have a goalie problem. And if he can stay healthy, then they don't. And I think they have the insurance in Korchenkov behind him. I'm not worried about the goaltending, but it's just the health there for Frederik Andersen is definitely a concern overall. But I don't think it's hit the panic button. This is the reason why they're not going to win a Stanley Cup. I think that there's more structural issues with them, as I kind of talked about with Rob Brandamore, that lead me to more concerns than the goaltending on this team. And Peter Korchenko's numbers, they're solid as well. His even strength numbers aren't great, and I think that might be where some of the concern comes in. But his penalty kill numbers are very good. He's a very good high danger goalie. I think that the issue comes in that his as a low danger and mid danger goalie, he's actually like not great, and that's kind of the most shots the Hurricanes give up, which is why his numbers don't look great, because they're so good defensively that they're actually kind of hurting him. If that makes sense in a weird way, it's very much the John Gibson thing, where like the more shots he faced, the better he got. I think Korchenkov might be kind of built like that too. So in terms of like being the goalie for the Hurricanes, he might not be the best fit, because the team's just too good defensively. If that makes sense, it's a weird criticism to have. But overall, like I do think that he can be stable if given a proper time to shine. And if not, then maybe you look to bring in some insurance in net. But I think you might have to wait until, again, teams kind of know that they're out of the race. And finally, the special teams. I think the power play, like I said, is better than the numbers indicated last year. And the penalty kill is very good, right? Like John Martinook is an incredible penalty killer. Jacob Slavin, obviously. Jalen Chatfield, the same thing. Keandre Miller was an exceptional penalty killer. Sebastian Aho is one of the best penalty killers in the league. Frederick Anderson's a great penalty kill goalie. Like the penalty kill in this team is phenomenal. It was last year. Their actual numbers were great. Their expected numbers were phenomenal. The power play, I just think the PDO should bounce them back. So joining me now is the senior editor for North State Journal. He's also a Hurricanes writer for The Athletic, and he's the PHWA Carolina chapter head, Cory Lavalette. Cory, thank you so much for joining us to talk a little bit about the Carolina Hurricanes going into the season.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to do it. Excited to get going again with the season.
Yeah, it should be a fun team. They obviously had a very busy offseason with the signing of Nikolai Ehlers and then the trade for Keandre Miller, but also a full year of Logan Stankoven. What do you think some expectations should be for fans going into this year for how the Hurricane season should play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like they have been the last couple of years, this is a Stanley Cup contender, right? The big question is, can you get over the hump and can you compete with a team like the Panthers? And that's, I think that's the question every team in the league has to ask themselves right now is, can they elevate to that level? Can they, can the Panthers stay at that level? And then can the Hurricanes elevate to that level? So I think the Hurricanes have as good of a chance of doing that as any of the other teams in the league. They're in a really good place with their roster. They're in a really good cap space place. And have the opportunity to get better if they need to and want to, on top of already having a really good roster with good veterans and some really exciting young players.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it there a little bit, but one of the things that's really stood out to me over the last number of years with the Hurricanes is just how well they've been able to manage their assets to kind of set themselves up to make big moves. We've seen them obviously with the Jake Gensel trade, another Mikko Rantanen trade, and it still seems like a team that still has a bunch of assets left in the cupboard. Is there an area of this team that you think they're likely to address via trade at some point during the season, or that you think they should address that still needs some work?
Well, I mean, I think for sure, you look at the second line center position, and that's a question mark, right? There's some talk in the front office of giving Logan Stankoven or Seth Jarvis maybe a chance to move to the middle. Rod Brindamore has kind of scoffed at the idea of Jarvis moving to the middle, but I know that's something that's been discussed in the organization. And Jesperi Kotkaniemi hasn't been able to elevate to that level. I think maybe his quote unquote struggles are a little overstated. He's just a guy who probably is a good third line center, and this is a team where, of any team in the league, you have a third line center who's entrenched in Jordan Staal. So that's the big question: is can you elevate that position, whether internally or trying to make a move externally? The problem is a lot of teams want second line centers, and there's not a lot of them out there. And the way this offseason shook out, it was tough, because I think it's been said plenty of times that there's maybe one team that really looks like they're in quote rebuilding mode, the Penguins, and everybody else thinks they're going to be better, they're going to compete for a playoff spot or whatever. So there's not a lot of sellers, but those sellers are going to show up after the first month of the season, month and a half of the season, when teams start to realize what they really are. So to me, that's the big that's the big hole right now. But it could be solved internally. But they've got, like we mentioned, they've got the cap space. They have assets, extra first round pick, things like that they can use to try to fill holes if they feel it's necessary.
So, kind of touching on the youth and the prospect side of the Hurricanes here, is there anybody that you are excited to see get a shot at making this team this year that maybe hasn't had a full time role yet in the NHL?
Well, I mean, I think it starts with Alexander Nikishin, right? And I don't think he has to quote make the team. I think he's on the team, but we haven't seen a lot of him. We saw a few games in the postseason when he was kind of forced into action due to a couple injuries. So I think now, we're going to get a chance to see what this kid's really all about. And I know the organization is, very, very excited about not only what he is now, but what his upside is. Big, strong, two-way guy. He can be pretty ferocious and mean and a big hitter. So that, an element maybe that the Hurricanes have lacked a bit is, you come across the blue line, there hasn't really been a defenseman that you worry is going to take your head off. And Nikishin might be that kind of player. We'll see how he adapts and how, when he starts to feel comfortable to kind of roll that element back into his game that we saw a lot of in the KHL. But to me, he's the big one. The Hurricanes are actually, in the prospect tournament down in Tampa right now. Bradley Nadeau's the name that jumps off the page there. Obviously has elevated himself at every level. He went into college, played really well, went into his first year in the AHL, scores 30 goals. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but he has a really, really good shot and can be one of those kind of instant offense guys that can be tough to come by. But that being said, there are certainly a lot of wings on this Hurricanes roster right now, especially if you don't see one of those guys I mentioned move to the middle. It's really tough to find a spot for a guy who's a goal scorer to play in the top nine with the Hurricanes right now. So it might be that he has to marinate a little bit, or they have to make room for him in some way. So he's another guy that obviously you want to keep an eye on, a guy that's just done better and better with each step he's taken in his young career.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of going back to the outlook for the team going into the season. What do you think is something that would absolutely need to go right in order for the Hurricanes to get over that hump and finally make and possibly win the Stanley Cup this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is going to be health and goal. They haven't had that in recent years. Last year was really tough because not only did Frederik Andersen have his issues, but Pyotr Kochetkov had some issues, and then all of a sudden their depth maybe wasn't up to snuff. Right, Spencer Martin did okay in a spot role, and then kind of unraveled a bit. Dustin Tokarski came in. Obviously, he's not a long-term solution, but he played. They survived that, but. A little different this year, right? You have Caden Primo, who I think is kind of right now a AAA plus player. He's proven he's really good at the AHL level. He's had moments at the NHL level, but also has struggled at times. So it's good to have a little more depth, I think, veteran depth of guys that you can trust. But really what they need is, I mean, and they don't need Frederik Andersen to play 60 games, but that, they need that rotation of those two top guys, I think. Of him and Kochetkov, if they can alternate games and they can both play well. Anderson is really, really steady when he's healthy. Kochetkov is a little bit up and down, and he's still a young guy. His highs are really high. His lows can be a little lower, so if he can kind of stabilize as far as his consistency, that could be a big thing too. So to me, I mean, that's the big question mark, I think. But at the same time, everyone who gets up in arms about their goaltending, they have two good NHL goalies. It's not like they're in dire straits in net. It's just a matter of, can they stay healthy? And then now with that little bit of extra depth, if there is an injury, I think they can be a little more confident about the guy who's going to have to step in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, I think Sebastian Aho especially, I think, got a lot of attention this year just from the playoffs and everything. But is there a player on the Hurricanes that you really like, that you think deserves to get more of a spotlight around the the national media, I guess, like a guy that like people really aren't talking about.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of those guys have kind of emerged into the spotlight, right? Seth Jarvis has become a big name. Jacob Slavin, with the way he played in the in the Four Nations Cup, and then or Four Nations Face Off, and then in the postseason and stuff. So those are two guys that maybe haven't gotten as much attention as they deserve, but that's kind of changed a little bit. A guy I really like is Jalen Chatfield. He's you don't hear about him a lot, but he played top 4 minutes last year. He's the kind of guy who, if you play him with a partner who's maybe a little bit more offensive minded, a little bit more of a risk taker, or we mentioned Nikishin. If he were to play with Nikishin, a guy who's going to have to learn how to play in the NHL, he's a guy who can, like Slavin, cover up mistakes for you. His acceleration is so good. He's a defensive minded guy who can pitch in a little bit on offense. But he's a guy that I don't know that there's a huge jump still coming for him. He got to the NHL a little older, but I think his game is really underrated, and he's done a really good job. And then Sean Walker too. I thought he was really good last year. Guys have had a tough time coming into this system. It's taken them. Took Brent Burns. It took Dmitry Orlov like a half a year to start to feel comfortable. That never happened with Sean Walker last year. He came in and he looked good off the hop and never really had any kind of downturn. So, not a huge point producer or anything, but a reliable defenseman. So those two guys to me maybe don't get enough credit. And, they're going to get a little more opportunity this year too with I mentioned Burns and Orlov with their departures, a little different. And, Keandre Miller obviously is a guy to watch too.
All right, well, that's all I got for you. If you want to take the opportunity here just to plug where people can find you, the floor is yours.
Sure. Yeah. So, most of my stuff at North State Journal. So you can certainly see me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Cory Love, and a lot of my stuff is there. And then I'm at the Athletic usually once a week, a little more in the playoffs, a little less in the off season. Give our little break now that the craziness was over, but ramping up again. Probably going to have something next week on Jackson Blake. So, a guy we didn't talk about, but pretty another good young asset. So yeah, definitely can check me out there, and I try to interact with people on social media if I can, and as long as people are in control and stuff. So pretty open to that and trying to give insight to the best of my knowledge. So
All right, well, thanks again, Cory, for coming on and talking to us. And there you have it. So thank you so much for watching the Carolina Hurricanes deep dive. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Let me know what you think of the Hurricanes down below, and where you think they'll finish, and if you think they'll finally break through and get to the Stanley Cup final this year. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you for the top four. We're so close to the series being done, but I have so much more stuff planned for the entire season, so make sure you subscribe so you can catch all of that. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.